welcome to our first road trip diary all the year round, a monthly podcast about British and Irish literature and culture in the 19th century. I'm your host, Emma Probert, and I research literary connections between Austen and Gaskell and the novel of Manners, alongside my co-host, Dr. Hayley Flynn, who researches dream and periodicals in the 19th century. If you'd like to see the sites that we visited during this episode, you can follow us on social media at All Year Round Pod on Twitter and Instagram, which are linked in our description, or you can watch this episode on YouTube at Victorianism. Now on with the show.
Okay, welcome to our very first road trip episode of All the Year Round. Today we are going to visit George Eliot country. So it's between kind of the border of Leicester and Warwickshire. It's in Nuneaton. Yeah, it's not too far from where I live.
Not too far from where I live either.
No, we're in Leicester now, and it's kind of a nice summer day. It's not particularly sunny, but at least it's dry, which is better than positive for the last few days.
Particularly since this time we're trialling out lapel mics, so hopefully it stays nice and dry for us.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoy coming along with us.
Yeah, and we should see you next at Griff House. Okay, so we just arrived at Griff House, which actually came up on us really suddenly. I wasn't expecting the turn, and then there was just a sign for the Beefeater.
Yeah, in my head, because I've just been looking at pictures of the outbuildings and the house in the 1960s, that was what was in my mind, and it wasn't until you were like, it says we're there. I was like, oh, we're looking for a Premier Inn Beefeater. There it is. And it was quite a sharp right turn, I think.
Yeah, so if you're planning to come here, just be aware that it comes upon you quite suddenly, and it's quite hidden by trees as well, the turn until you get right up to it. But yeah, we're just sitting in the car now. We haven't actually gone up to the building yet, but it looks pretty from the outside.
It does, and we thought that we'd just have a really, really quick note of the history of Griff House.
Yeah, so why are we actually here at a Beefeater for George Eliot?
So the building of Griff House has existed for a number of centuries. George Eliot isn't actually the first famous person to have lived at Griff House.
No.
There was an 18th century engineer called Henry Bayton. He's the creator of a plane table for the county of Warwickshire, which was published in 1728. That's a scale of 1 inch to 1 mile, so he did the whole county. So Robert Evans, who was Mary Ann Evans' father, they originally lived on a large farmhouse on Arbor Estate. So Robert Evans moved here with his young family in 1820 to Griff House. And he lived here for nearly 22 years until he and his youngest child, Mary Ann, better known as George Eliot, moved over to Coventry in 1841. So the house has seen some alterations in recent years. I mean...
Yeah, I'm slightly nervous about how many alterations.
Yeah, so, okay. The building is actually a listed building. On the 6th of December 1947, it was made a Grade 2 listed building. So there must be some things which stay the same. So we know that Whitbread basically bought up the space to use as part of the restaurant hotel chain, which has now become sort of the classic combination of Premier Inn and Beefeater. So there are parts of the building which I think should be original, and I think you were saying probably has some cladding to it, because structurally there's a lot of things that you can't irrevocably alter or demolish.
Yeah, so perhaps things that we're not necessarily going to be able to see, but they should be protected somewhere.
But it's
underneath.
There. The spirit of the building.
Yeah.
Maybe if we hug the walls real tight, we'll feel the vibe of George Eliot. Some of the things we'll see. So the one thing that we do know is the flagstones are original. So those are the paving stones of an entryway. So I guess we're going to go into a Beefeater and stare at the floor.
Okay, let's go. And I have to mention, first of all, that it has actually become a nice sunny day.
Yes. It's not even that humid. It's quite a nice breeze.
Butterflies around, and I think it would be quite scenic here if it wasn't for the fact that there's a very busy road next door, so you can mainly just hit traffic.
Yeah, but thinking about the building, because we're sort of like coming up on it, it's difficult to know. I think we're going to have to look at some pictures of like the 1960s variation.
It's a very pretty building. I do really want to go and see the original outhouses, but from the pictures that we've seen, I do think they're going to be kind of tucked around the back. It looked like they are by where they keep the bins, so we might be about to look a bit odd, but
and do you know what?
Let's go and explore.
We might have to ask them where it is. Might have to get permission. What I was surprised to learn from one of the websites that we looked at when we were doing some initial reconnaissance was that the manager's flat is part of the building, so that manager just gets to live in,
very lucky,
George Eliot's house. Okay, so we have to be almost like sneaky architecture people, because I think this is part of the original. Yeah,
I agree, definitely.
Seeing
you can actually see
the brick.
Yeah, I was just about to say, you can see the change in the brick, but they have tried to match it
sort
to a degree.
Yeah, I mean, because they did say they expanded it, so I think that this is like one side, there's the back bit. Oh, they have extended this quite far out, haven't they?
A lot, I would say. And actually, if you look up from where we are now, which is we're kind of standing on the left-hand side, far left-hand side of the building, even from the newer bit, if you look up above it, the windows above are obviously the original, with the original brick as well. So kind of, this building would have been a lot smaller looking than it actually is now, but I think still quite pretty, quite impressive looking.
I think so. I mean, the bit that we're looking at here has blinds, but looking over to the left at the lace curtains just up above this one little turret, looks very Victorian, very museum-like.
And I've just looked a little bit further to the left, and I think this is it. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's a really cool building. And actually, this side of this is nice. Oh, there's a George Eliot plaque in there. George Eliot lived here March 1820 to March 1841 above the door. This does look like an area that people don't really come to.
I know. I feel like there should be a sign that's like, go round George Eliot history. I mean, I guess we have a kind of beer garden situation,
sort of, but it's kind of the few benches that are out here and umbrellas seem to be stacked almost like they're spares.
That's true.
There is a gazebo over there. Maybe this is just an extra space in the summer or something.
Yes.
The actual outbuilding is in a considerable state of disrepair. It's very cool looking, but the brickwork is severely cracked. It does look like it's had some kind of structural issues over time. I doubt you can get in there now, to be honest.
Well, I mean, it's padlocked, I assume, partially for safety, but there does look to be a mouse hole. So
that does. At least somebody's living in there.
Yeah. I am slightly wary of that broken glass up above, though, Hayley. So maybe let's not stand directly underneath that.
Yeah, actually, from the window, you can also see there are holes in the roof.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
You can see that where the original wooden beams are going through the ceiling. The building, as you turn around and walk away from that, looks, I think, even older, but I don't know whether that's just because it's potentially even more in a state of disrepair. The roof is sagging.
Yes, the tiles have fallen in.
There is a little robin sitting on top of it right now, though, which is nice.
Oh, I'm not sure if the microphones can pick it up, but
if it doesn't, then just know that it sounds lovely.
Yes, it does. Oh, and I see a bunch of bees up near the little door. So
I think there's a beehive up there.
I think that too. There's signs on the doors. Just to let everybody know, we are moving around a quite impressive, massive set of bins. The outbuildings are not actually protected underneath the Grade 2 listing of the house.
Oh yeah, because didn't they consider knocking them down?
They did. It was one of the things that they were considering doing. They were considering knocking this down. I'm not sure if they wanted to use it to build actual modern storage space or not. But that didn't actually go through. So there were protests about knocking down historical buildings because obviously it's the last almost untouched part of the estate. So they are still here. security alarmed for storage, but they are in a state of disrepair.
Yeah, we are also at the team members' designated smoking area now, according to this sign. So this is very much not a used area. I think this is just staff parking. The building that's now next to us is completely new.
I do wonder whether there are any George Eliot fan favourites who come here, a bit like us, just to poke around the old outbuildings.
There must be sometimes. It's such an important building to her life. It's not like she just visited here or anything.
No, lived here for decades. Okay, we're going to be super careful because that has propane tanks in it.
Yeah, there's a pretty archway between the two outbuildings. That's what we're looking at right now.
Yeah, it does make me wonder what this looked like originally, because in the official 1960s photos, before the Premiering took over in the 1980s, there's only pictures of the front of the house, because that was obviously what they were putting onto the listing. There aren't any pictures of what this looked like before. Turning round, we sort of saw the archway, quite a nice little archway with a sort of alcove, which has the plaque of George Eliot above it. And it does look that this was actually the front of the house.
Yeah, it does. Like this was probably the front door originally. Now it just looks like it's not a used door at all. But it's quite picturesque.
It really is, because I think that, you know, the wall was there partially for like a drive almost. It gives you a little bit of space between ourselves and the outbuildings, which actually now we've had a little bit of a poke around, look quite extensive.
Yeah, they do. So actually I think if we walk around the other side of the outbuildings, not towards the bins where we just are, we might actually see some more of this. Probably in a similar state of disrepair to the rest. Also, apologies for the background noise, but the road is really loud.
And there's a car, so there's also that. Trying to get run over.
Although it's slightly falling down, there is something really pretty about the outbuildings with the ivy overgrowing them and this slate roof kind of sagging in the middle.
I agree. It does look incredibly picturesque. And it does make more sense now why they were so insistent on not knocking them down, because they thought, is it really worth it in many senses if the outbuildings, because in my mind I'd imagine them as much smaller.
Yeah, I had as well. I thought there was perhaps maybe, you know, one outbuilding that they wanted to knock down because it would allow them to have a much bigger space, but actually it looks like they're huge.
It looks extensive, which does track because farmland.
Yeah, and actually, just for the sake of people who can't see this now, we are about to get back onto the road here, so there is no way of walking around the outbuildings.
But we're going to have a little bit of a poke because we're
at least within the the beefeater grounds. But if we go out onto the main road, maybe. Ah, there's no path.
Oh, and a post box.
There is a post box, but there's no path anymore.
Well, I was also trying to figure out which way the house originally faced, because her very first school, Dame School, was literally opposite the house.
Now,
so
actually, I think
it would be there.
Yeah, so as you're coming out of the exit of the beefeater, there's a big field opposite. I think it probably would have been there.
Yes. I mean, the four places that she was schooled around here, none of the buildings have survived.
No.
Although that does look old.
That does. There's a small house that does look like it's quite old. We can't actually get round to the other outbuildings. This looks like it's somebody else's property.
Nevertheless, we can poke. We can stand here and look.
So yeah, I'd be very surprised if this isn't part of the original buildings, because it does look like it's attached to one of the outbuildings that is part of the beefeater. Yes,
that large one definitely is. Which is interesting to see so many construction elements here.
Yeah.
Knowing that, you know, construction hasn't been active here because, of course, they decided not to.
Yeah, this does look a little like it's a place that the materials are being stored. Because there is a larger kind of metal clad building next to us here. Again, starting to feel very not Victorian, not Eliot-like.
All I was going to say was I think it would be really interesting if this was ever restored to have someone who is obviously sort of an expert in, I suppose, farmland, because there's so many different outbuildings. I would be curious to know which building was used for what, and it would be great if they could restore it. Not just a question of making it look prettier or setting up a visitor centre or fancy boards. I think that they are going to have to get some experts of, I suppose, Victorian masonry and architecture to come in.
It does look like there's a nice walking path.
Would you like to have a walk
here? Yeah, let's go for a walk. Let's be nosy.
It can be great. We'll go for a walk, and then once we finish with our walk, we'll pop back into the Beefeater. We'll check out the flagstones.
Very pretty bird noises now as we're getting further away from the road.
So although this is properly paved, it's... Oh! Oh!
As we're walking down this path, a horse has just peeked at us through this.
The horse is here.
That little pony. That's so cute.
Oh my. Trying to get a good shot of this pony without disturbing it too much. Hello, friend. It's interesting to think that, I mean, obviously this is sort of a paved space, but it is interesting to imagine that, even if this isn't exactly a street or a path that Eliot might have walked down, or at least close to where she would have been walking around.
There are tons of blackberries growing down here. Obviously it's not the right time of year for them, but I wonder whether there were loads of blackberries for Eliot as well. This is pretty. There are loads of butterflies.
Oh, there's thistles. That's my one outdoorsy thing. There is a thistle. For those of you who listen to the podcast regularly, you'll know I had to at least learn some flowers and plants for the Secret Language of Flowers episode that we did in May.
Yeah. I wonder whether Eliot ever picked some flowers with secret messages.
It would be strange to think of George Eliot trying to traverse this space now and how different it would have been from her own time.
Yeah.
Even in just sort of small things that we take for granted, like the noise. Horses have definitely been along this trail. Guess how we know, listeners.
We need to keep a count of how many episodes we mentioned horse poop.
That's a new secret bingo that I guess we and our listeners will have.
So we just got back from actually going inside Griff House.
Yeah, and it was lovely.
It was. We spent so much time in the outbuildings.
When we first walked in there, I kind of thought, are the original features going to be visible right now? Because we had read that the original flagstones were going to be there, but as you walk in through the entrance of the actual Beefeater, there's nothing nothing original, nothing obviously kind of Victorian or Eliot or anything. But we were lucky enough to meet a very nice man called Chris, who showed us the part of the Beefeater that is actually original and opened up the door, which was Eliot's front door for us, so we could go in and out of that.
Yeah, so we got to walk in and outside of Eliot's front door and on the original flagstones and look at the original fire and at least have that little piece of sort of connecting with George Eliot's history, which was great. So many thanks to Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. And also really nice to hear that they, at least from their perspective, are very confident that the outbuildings are going to become a visitor centre in the near future, it sounded like.
Yeah, just some COVID delays according to our man on the inside, Chris.
Yeah.
And luckily, apparently, he's happy to give us the VIP experience for next time as well.
Yeah, so it's for all of those bits that we saw, and we said there was such a kind of charm about it, a prettiness about it, and they do still feel special. So it will be really nice for that to be kind of put back to good use for people to actually kind of experience that the space as Eliot's house.
Yeah, and like so much of the Beefeater paraphernalia that we were looking at as we stopped for a quick drink.
Also try the iced coffee.
Oh, the iced coffees there were brilliant. So yeah, there's so much cow paraphernalia. It kind of connects up with the outbuildings. So there's kind of a through theme with that as well, which would be nice. But yes, so the flagstone floor that we were looking at, because I had seen on my forays into researching about this, everyone mentions that the flagstones are original. Weirdly, they don't mention the fireplace at the door, which we found very exciting.
Yeah.
But yes, the flagstone floor is meant to have been one of the pieces of inspiration for Dorcott Mill from Mill on the Floss, which was lovely. And just as we leave this like incredibly picturesque place, we wanted to reflect on some of Eliot's words and impressions and think about how the novelist grew up in, quoting, "Among the midland villages and markets, along the tree-studded hedgerows, and where the heavy barges seem in the distance to float mysteriously among the rushes and the feathered grass."
It's so pretty.
I think so.
And it is a very pretty place. I mean, I don't know whether, again, people can hear very much background noise going on, but the road is quite noisy.
It is very close to us, yes.
But that being said, there is definitely an atmosphere here that's worth seeing even before the visitor centre's finished. I think you do have to kind of skirt around the edge and look for it. But I was expecting there to be less Eliot here. Honestly, when I found out that it was a Beefeater and a Premier Inn, I thought we might be able to see a bit of the outside of what the building would have looked like for Eliot. But
I was literally just thinking stones. I was like, just look at stones on a floor and just take what I can get.
But no, it's been a really, really nice experience. And next, we're going to go hopefully just about 10 minutes away to the Nuneaton Museum and Art Gallery, where there is an Eliot exhibition.
Okay, so unfortunately, on editing this video, we realised that the sound we recorded while at the museum had some issues. So we're recording this after we got home, and just hopefully going to give you a bit of an idea of what we did see at the museum and what it was like.
Yeah.
So what was your impression of the museum?
I thought it was such a lovely little museum. I thought it was a really, really nice space. So when you go in, there's that small space for the receptionist, and they've got the little shop up front as well. That's also good because if you're just nipping in for some George Eliot paraphernalia, you can pick up a postcard or pick up one of their little walking tour booklets.
Yeah, and
So I thought
it
that
is
was lovely.
really tiny, that little shop, but they do have some nice things. And actually, the thing that I thought was the nicest when we first went in is it was just really friendly. Like it just had a really kind of welcoming, a welcoming vibe to it. The woman at the desk was lovely. There was a woman with a small child in there who was just immediately like, "Oh, you're gonna love it." So
Yeah, it was good.
yeah, and even before we got in, the surroundings of that museum are also really nice, aren't they? So we walked through a park to get there because we drove past the museum without seeing a car park, but immediately did see a pay and display one just behind it. But actually, when we drove in, you can see the museum. It's like right next to you. So I think if there is one outside the museum, that's definitely a good option. I think it was £1.50 for 3 hours to stay there as well, so it's not overly expensive.
Yeah, it was good. And the exhibition is probably the easiest to get to. You know, as soon as you walk through the doors, you see the shop straight ahead, receptionist to the left, and to the right is the opening to the Eliot exhibition. It sort of takes up, I'd say, about half of the ground floor of the museum.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when you enter, it's a really, I think it's done in like some nice deep reds and some lovely sort of violet lavender purples as well, which I don't know why, that just feels like very Victorian colours to me. That and like arsenic green and china blue. I think those are the colours.
Yes. Although we'll get to the green room afterwards, I guess, because that first room, when you first go in, the immediately catching your eye, they have a Victorian dress on display, which we both were kind of like, oh wow, as soon as we walked in there and saw that.
Yeah, it was a Victorian dress that had been used in a local production, a play for a theatre. So that was really, really nice to see, sort of like your entrance space.
Yeah, it was just a really good kind of like setting the scene, getting in your head kind of this is this is Eliot's time, in which is, you know, guess what you want from the opening of the
Yeah,
museum. That first space, it doesn't have as much. It's quite
it
kind
doesn't,
of
but I really like the context of it though, because as you say, that dress, it like sets the scene, but because it's sort of the George Eliot and what they call the writing room space. So they've got a writing desk where the writer in residence from the museum, it's a copy of her desk, and it was encouraging children sort of write their own story. And on the back wall, it had that kind of the history of women writers all sort of knitted up together. So of course we had my girl Jane Austen, we have the
yes.
Brontes, Eliot, Virginia Woolf, so on and so forth. So I think even though it was like quite a small space, I think that was really well thought out.
Yeah, it was. And there was a good mix in there. And we also found the best George Eliot masks in there to play with, which if you're following us on social media, you will have seen a nice example of. So that was fun.
Yeah,
And actually, it generally is just quite fun and friendly for kids as well, isn't it? I think extending that point that I was making, that it's quite friendly when you go in, the middle part of the exhibition behind the dress, there were kind of word tiles for kids to play with, and the masks. Obviously, there's the desk that you were talking about where you can write. And there was a comfy chair as well with lots of Eliot books on a shelf next to it. So you can just relax with some Eliot books.
so well thought out because you had the writing desk in the corner. In front of that set of books was the place that the kids could do the word games. They also had like a figure of a Victorian man and a Victorian woman to colour in, and you could do sort of engravings there. I think that it was really purposely put like that because if you're a parent, you can then sort of sit down right in front of your kids while they're playing, but sort of, and they had like loan copies of all of Eliot's work that you could literally just dip into. And I thought that was really, really nice because so often when you go to a museum, they don't really have that reading space. And the museums that I have been to that kind of offer you up the person's work, I just really enjoy like the integration of being like, this is also a space for you to get deep into the work itself and not just sort of the life and sort of the remnants that we have.
Yeah, so almost not just the history, not just this is a thing from that author's time, but this is also a celebration of the work that they did. And as you noticed as well, they it was quite accessible. They had large print
Mm.
versions as well of the history file that we found. There was a large print version of that, wasn't there?
Yeah, so they had a large print version of the text, they had a large print version of the files, they had a big plastic folder filled with large prints of a lot of the letters and museum clippings. They also had a separate pack hooked to the wall, which has the large print of all the display cards, because it can be a little bit tricky when you're sort of pressed up, leaning against the glass, trying desperately to read, what number 4 is down the bottom. So that
Yeah.
was really good as well.
Yeah, just very friendly, very well thought out. And then when you walk into the second room, this was my favorite one. It has the most amazing green, dark green wallpaper and the velvet hangings, and they've really made it feel very much like it's a fancy Victorian living room. Especially because in the corner there's a life-size model display um, depicting Eliot and her, oh,
George
what was
Henry
his name?
Lewis, John
Yeah, what was
Cross.
her? Yes, John Cross. That's the one.
Yeah.
That's the name I was trying to think of. Yeah, so you got Eliot sitting in the armchair with John Cross next to her in the armchair, and then Luz standing behind her chair. And yeah, in this very, very Victorian style room, which then has a lot more stuff in display cases. Like we got to see some of her clothes. There was like a mantilla lace that belonged to her, her sewing kit, very like nice personal things. Some of her furniture.
Carved mirror. in particular was gorgeous.
Yeah, so pretty. And I
Yeah,
think one of the things
we
you commented on at the time is it's interesting that they'd hung illustrations from Romola over the walls.
well, what I was going to say, what was one thing that we commented at the time that was interesting, that was an aside that we might have foregone our listeners from hearing because that recording was lost to time. But I remember when we looked at the lace, I turned around to you and I said, "Do you think there's any cells left of Eliot that we could clone?"
Oh yes, you did. Yeah.
But that's dystopian, going in
Yeah.
the complete opposite direction, back into historical fiction. Yes, lots of prints of Romola from the original Cornhill magazine. So those are the ones with the large engravings,
Yeah.
and they were hung up all around the room as well.
Yeah, and they are lovely illustrations. I mean, like you said, Romola, not necessarily her most famous work, but they were impressive illustrations for Cornhill.
They really
And
were. Yeah, I was sort of expecting Middlemarch,
hmm,
because sort of you always think of sort of the most famous one, but I think it would be really nice for the people who are super into Eliot to see that kind of stuff sort of laid out.
yeah, there were also objects from her father as well. In the corner, there was a like a diary, essentially, wasn't there, written by her father, and it's open on a page where he was explaining going to visit somebody, kind of connected to characters. Although I think that was in the first room, sort of making reference to the fact that this might be the kind of thing that she was looking at when she was inspired to write this character.
Yeah, there were lots of halls and churches and lanes and like these little details that sort of come into daily life that a lot of people have sort of pinpointed. A bit like when we went to go and see Griff House at the beginning. They were like, we think that this very specific space was the inspiration for this very specific space in her work as well.
Yeah. And by the time we finished there, it was kind of, I think, about 2 p.m. and both of us were really hungry. And so we had to move
Nice.
on, but we didn't look at all upstairs, which had all of the art up there. And if we went back again, I definitely feel like it would be worth doing that. It was a really nice space.
Yes, something that we might do for season 2 of All the Year Round, because I mean, it's how we started this section, it's how I'd like to end it, which was I would like to go and grab one of those local walking maps, because that one didn't so much focus on the bigger things or the most recognisable things of Eliot. So obviously the museum is fairly recognisable. Arbury Estate, very recognisable because, it's got South Farm on its estate as the place that, Eliot grew up in her earliest years. The reason I was so interested in that was because it's got a map of basically local streets of places that are kind of imbibed with Eliot, like places that she'd been or places that would have been familiar to her. Just a really like local kind of grassroots level stuff that if you weren't from Nuneaton or if you weren't like a very hardcore Eliot fan, you might not know existed. So I think next time I'd really like to go and do that.
Yeah, we absolutely should. But if this were the end of the museum part of our road trip, we would now be telling you that we are about to go to Astley Book Farm.
Well, in a way, because we're doing the edits, we are
Yes, that's true.
going to relive it with
So,
you.
back to the actual day.
So you just come out of Astley Book Farm. What did you think?
It's massive. It's truly huge. For something that's off like a short, sharp turn in the middle of the countryside. Because I remember you telling me about it before, and I was imagining like one like solid single like almost rectangular barn, like maybe 2 floors, but like big. I was not expecting like the twisting, winding, all these different like sections of it, and it was really lovely.
It's like a labyrinth of books, one of my favourite places to visit.
Yeah.
And they also have the best cafe, so we just had a lovely lunch.
Phenomenal.
Unfortunately, we didn't quite have time for coffee and cake. Just move for now that it's really good, and we'll be back.
Yeah, no, the lunch was really amazing. We had like a hot pork sandwich with applesauce and gravy and stuffing and roast potatoes, and it all came out like really quickly. It was gorgeous. Yeah, could use a pick-me-up coffee, but we'll plow on through. We went to go and visit. Well, one of the reasons we're here, if you're wondering, this is not just a random stop off for us. We're here because it has a little George Eliot section.
It does.
Dedicated space for it.
Yeah, so they have the kind of poster up for Eliot Country and lots of, not just Eliot's books, but kind of books by critics about Eliot and some of the copies of the Eliot Review and things like that. So yeah, definitely a place to look out for. It's got a huge range as well, so not just subjects, but in terms of the price point. So they've got a whole little shed full of just cheap 50p ones. They've got ones that are sort of in the reasonable kind of the Penguin sections as well, and they've also got some first editions of various things as well. So we did have to pry me away from a North and South copy, a first edition of North and South that was going for $995. So no matter what your price point is, I'm sure you can have fun at Astley Book Farm. Yeah. But now, looking out over the beautiful Warwickshire countryside, onto Aubrey Hall.
Our final stop of our first tour of Eliot Country.
See that here we are currently as close as we could get to Aubrey Hall. It's really not open very often, so if you actually want to be able to go in there, you have to go on a bank holiday weekend. I think it's open 4 times a year. There is actually a cafe, even though it's open only 4 times a year. But so if you don't go on a day when it's open, you literally can't see it. We were kind of hoping that you would at least be able to see it a bit from the road or from a path, but we spent a while driving around the kind of
huge estate.
Yeah, and you can't. Everywhere you go is just sort of blocked off. You can see the kind of gateway into it, but as soon as you pass under the archway, there are just big signs saying, it's private, you can't stop here. So we actually decided to drive to Aubrey Castle instead, which is very pretty. It's very
Astley
nice.
Castle.
Astley Castle, sorry, not Aubrey Castle. That's not the thing.
That's why it's confusing, because it's Astley Castle in Astley, which is bordering the Aubrey estate.
Yeah, and it is literally bordering it. So when you go up to the castle, if you look out to your right, you can kind of see, in the distance, see the grounds of the estate.
Yes.
So it's definitely worth visiting here because it is lovely. And I mean, the castle's obviously far, far older than Eliot, but maybe she might have visited.
And we technically stood on the Aubrey estate using the Landmark Trust rescuing buildings right of way. So we could not see Aubrey estate, the house, but we were technically on the Aubrey estate
land.
Yes.
Right, yeah. So that's pretty much as close as we can get, which is kind of a shame because on the estate is the cottage where Eliot was actually born at South Farm. But there's absolutely no way you can get near that unless you go on one of the specific tour days.
Yeah. That's something to do for the future.
Yes. So we can come back.
Once in a blue moon when we're both free and it's also a bank holiday and we can also book an advance situation.
Yes, exactly. But yes, I think kind of a fitting wrap up, I guess.
Yeah. Well, this was an experiment.
Yeah. So now back to Leicester.
Yes. Drop me off back home. After 8 hours on the road.
8 hours at Eliot. That sounds like a good title.
Yes.
For our next episode of All the Year Round, we are visiting Symington's factory in Market Harborough, which is a fascinating collection of corsets from the 19th century. We hope to see you then.